I handed my stepsons exactly what they demanded, and watched the color drain from their faces when they realized what they'd actually won. After 24 years of marriage, my husband passed and left me with what his sons called the bare minimum. A small insurance payout, 30 days to pack my things, a stack of medical debt I never knew existed. They had lawyers, they had the will, they had everything figured out. So I gave them what they wanted. Every property, every business asset, every last thing they'd spent months scheming to take from me. And then their attorney read one sentence out loud, and the room went completely silent. This is the story of a woman who learned that the most powerful thing you can do to greedy people is give them exactly what they deserve. Stay until the end. The twist doesn't just surprise you. It changes how you see the whole story. Speech balloon. Drop a comment. What city are you watching from? And what would you have done in her place? Thumbs up, like and subscribe to never miss a story from Quiet Justice, where the truth always comes out. And patience always wins. Sparkling heart. Send a super thanks if this story moved you. Every bit helps keep these stories coming. Full transcript. The morning my stepsons handed me what they called my fair share. They were smiling. Two grown men, standing in my late husband's study, wearing his death like a new suit. And they were smiling. I want to tell you something before I go any further. I am not a dramatic woman. I never have been. 24 years of marriage taught me how to be steady. How to be calm when everything around you is falling apart. How to smile in rooms where people are counting on you to cry. So when they told me what I was getting, I smiled. And they thought that meant they'd won. My husband's name was Raymond Caldwell. Ray, to everyone who loved him. He was 71 when he passed, and for 24 of those years, I was beside him. Not because I needed him financially. Not because it was comfortable or convenient. But because I genuinely, completely loved the man. We met when I was 39. He was 47. I was a mid-level project manager at a logistics firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was a quiet, methodical man who ran a regional supply chain consulting business out of a small office downtown. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the kind of man who walked into a room and made people stop talking. But when he talked to you, he made you feel like you were the only person in the world. That was Ray. His sons were already adults when we got together. Garrett, the older one, was 28. A real estate attorney out of Raleigh, sharp and calculating in the way that some people mistake for intelligence. Donovan, the younger, was 25. He'd bounced between cities and careers for years, always landing on Ray's generosity to cushion each fall. Ray had paid for Donovan's failed restaurant in Austin, his flopped photography studio in Nashville, his 2-year consulting venture that never once invoiced a real client. I never said a word about any of it. It wasn't my money. And it wasn't my place. But I watched. I noticed how Garrett would go quiet at family dinners when Ray talked about the future. His eyes doing that slow inventory of the house, the artwork, the cars. I noticed how Donovan would call his father twice as often when Ray mentioned health concerns. I noticed how neither of them ever once asked me how I was doing. Unless Ray was in the room. When Ray was diagnosed with congestive heart failure 3 years before he died, I became his world. His driver, his medication manager, his appointment keeper, his dietitian, his hand to hold at 2 in the morning when the fear got too loud. I left my job at the logistics firm. Not because he asked me to. Because I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Garrett came to visit twice in those 3 years. Donovan came once, and only because Ray had mentioned revising his will. I remember the way Donovan sat at the kitchen table that weekend, watching his father move slowly between rooms. And the expression on his face wasn't grief. It was math. Ray passed on a Tuesday morning in April. Quietly. The way he'd done most things in life. One moment he was breathing. The next, he wasn't. And just like that, 24 years of my life became past tense. They waited 4 days after the funeral. 4 days. The flowers were still fresh on the kitchen table. The guest towels in the bathroom still smelled like the soap I'd bought for out-of-town visitors. And Garrett was sitting across from me in Ray's study. A leather portfolio open on his knee. Looking at me the way he probably looked at opposing counsel. "Miriam," he said, using my name for what felt like the first time. "We want to make this as clean as possible. For everyone." Donovan sat beside him, nodding along. Performing solemnity the way a bad actor performs grief. All the right expressions. None of the feeling. Garrett opened the portfolio and slid a document across the desk toward me. "Dad's will is very clear," he said. "The house, valued at approximately $1.1 million, goes to Donovan and me jointly. The mountain property in Asheville, around $680, also to us. The business assets, including the client portfolio and consulting contracts, will be liquidated and divided between us equally." I looked at the document without touching it. "And me?" Donovan shifted in his seat. "Well, there's the life insurance. $175. And obviously you'd have 30 days to transition out of the house. We think that's more than generous." Generous. That's what they called it. Generous. $175 for a 63-year-old woman who hadn't drawn a salary in 3 years. Who had no pension. No retirement savings of her own to speak of. Who had poured herself entirely into caring for a man who, according to the document in front of her, had apparently seen fit to leave her with barely enough to rent an apartment for 2 years. "There's also the matter of the outstanding medical expenses," Garrett added, his tone shifting to that careful legal neutrality that I'd come to recognize as the sound of bad news wrapped in bureaucracy. "Roughly $210 in uncovered costs from Dad's final 2 years of treatment. Since you were his spouse and the primary decision-maker regarding his care. Those obligations technically fall to you." I did the math in my head. $175 in. $210 out. That left me $35 in debt. Starting over. At 63. In the hole. "I'll need a few days to review this," I said quietly. Garrett nodded, already closing his portfolio. "Of course. But Miriam, the sooner we can move forward, the better for everyone. These things have a way of getting complicated when they drag out." They left. And I sat alone in my husband's chair in my husband's study. In the house I'd lived in for 24 years. And I let myself feel it. All of it. For exactly 1 hour. And then I got up. Went to the kitchen. Made myself a cup of coffee. And started thinking. Ray had a habit. A small, quiet habit that I'd noticed early in our marriage and never thought much about. Whenever he got something important in the mail, something he wanted to remember, he'd tuck a handwritten summary on a yellow index card and slip it into the back of whatever book he was reading at the time. He said he liked knowing that the things that mattered were hidden in plain sight. After the boys left, I walked to the bookshelf in the study. Ray had been reading a biography of Eisenhower in his final months. I'd watched him dog-ear page 340 the last time he held it. I opened to page 340. 3 yellow index cards fell out. The first card had a phone number and a name. Eleanor Voss, Attorney at law, private estate planning. Below it, in Ray's careful handwriting. Call her first. Before anyone else. Before the boys. The second card had a number. Not a phone number. An account number. And below it, 2 words. Caldwell Reserve. The third card had just 1 sentence. Miriam. I knew you'd find this. I love you. Trust Eleanor. I sat down on the floor right there in front of the bookshelf. And for the second time that day, I let myself feel something. But this time it wasn't grief. It was something very different. Eleanor Voss had an office in a converted Victorian house on the east side of Charlotte. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the unhurried demeanor of a woman who had never once been rushed by a man in a suit. She'd been expecting my call. She'd been expecting it for 4 months. Raymond prepared for this very carefully, she told me, leading me into her office and closing the door. He came to me about a year before he died. He'd grown suspicious of some financial activity connected to Garrett and Donovan. And he wanted to make sure you were protected. Completely and legally protected. No matter what they tried. She opened a file on her desk. A thick one. The kind that takes a long time to build. The Caldwell Reserve account, she explained, held $3.9 million. Ray had been quietly liquidating non-essential investments for 18 months. Converting them to cash and moving them into an account that only I could access. Garrett and Donovan knew nothing about it. His accountant. His original accountant. Not the one Garrett had recommended 2 years ago. Had helped him structure everything to be fully legal and completely invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. The life insurance they told you about. Eleanor continued. The $175 policy? That's real. But it's not the only policy. Raymond also held a separate policy with a different insurer for $425, naming you as sole beneficiary. Garrett and Donovan never knew it existed. $600 in life insurance. $3.9 million in reserve. I wasn't broke. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't starting over in a rented room somewhere. But here's the part that took my breath away. Ray had also spent the last year of his life methodically mortgaging the house and the Asheville property. Not because he needed the cash. He moved the proceeds straight into the reserve. But because he wanted to make sure that if his sons tried to claim those properties, they would inherit not assets, but obligations. The house carried a $900 mortgage. The Asheville property, $620. Combined debt on 2 properties his sons believed were worth $1.78 million. $1.52 million. And with prepayment penalties and associated fees. The net inheritance from both properties was comfortably negative. Ray hadn't just protected me. He'd built a trap. And he'd left it up to me whether to spring it. Eleanor slid a document across her desk. This is the actual will. Executed 8 months ago. It supersedes any earlier version the boys may have obtained. Everything goes to you, Miriam. The disposition of the real property, the house and the Asheville cabin, is entirely at your discretion. You can keep them, sell them, or gift them to Garrett and Donovan. With the mortgages? I asked. With the mortgages, she confirmed. They go with the deeds. There's no separating them. I sat back in my chair and looked out Eleanor's window at the quiet street below. A woman was walking a dog. 2 kids were riding bikes. The most ordinary Tuesday afternoon imaginable. Is there more? I asked. Eleanor's expression shifted slightly. Yes. Raymond hired an investigator. About 14 months ago. She opened a second folder. What he found was significant. Garrett had been using Ray's business contacts to route referrals through a shell company Garrett controlled. Every time Ray's consulting firm recommended a vendor or contractor to a client, Garrett had been collecting a kickback through a company called Aldridge Referral Partners. The total over 4 years. Roughly $180. Donovan's situation was simpler and uglier. He'd borrowed $95 from his father over the past 2 years. Loans Ray had quietly documented and never mentioned. He'd also forged Ray's signature twice on documents authorizing withdrawals from a joint account that Ray had intended only for household expenses. The withdrawals totaled $43. Together, they had stolen nearly $250,000 from their dying father. What are my options? I asked. Eleanor leaned forward. You can pursue civil and criminal action. The evidence supports charges of elder financial abuse, fraud, and forgery. Garrett would almost certainly lose his law license. Donovan would face criminal exposure. Or, she paused, you can let them inherit what their father left them. Which is? She smiled quietly. Exactly what they deserve. I didn't rush. That was the important thing. I didn't storm back to the house. I didn't call Garrett with a list of accusations. I didn't need to. I went home. I made dinner. I sat in Ray's chair and read until it got dark. And the next morning, I called Garrett and told him I was ready to move forward. He sounded like a man who'd just been told his flight was back on schedule. Perfectly pleasant. Gracious, even. We'll set up a meeting at the end of the week, he said. Bring whatever paperwork you have. We can wrap everything up in one session. Sounds good, I said. I'll bring my attorney. A pause. Your attorney? Eleanor Voss. She handled Ray's estate planning. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm not familiar with her, he said carefully. She's excellent, I said. Ray trusted her completely. The meeting was held at the offices of Garrett's attorney, a man named Philip Stokes who radiated the particular confidence of someone who had never once doubted himself in a room. He had a large corner office overlooking uptown Charlotte, a very expensive watch, and an expression that suggested he found the whole proceeding mildly tedious. Garrett and Donovan sat on one side of the conference table. Eleanor and I sat on the other. Philip Stokes occupied the head of the table like a man used to controlling rooms. Mrs. Caldwell, Stokes began, I think we can make this relatively painless. We've prepared transfer documents for the primary residence and the Asheville property, along with releases for the business assets. Once you sign, your 30-day transition period begins immediately. I nodded politely. I appreciate the preparation. However, Eleanor has some documents she'd like to introduce first. Stokes looked at Eleanor the way some men look at women who are about to inconvenience them. Of course, he said. Eleanor opened her portfolio without rushing. She had the unhurried pace of a woman who knew something everyone else in the room didn't. She placed a document in the center of the table. This is Raymond Caldwell's final will, executed 8 months before his death. It supersedes all prior versions. Philip Stokes reached for it. He read the first page. Then the second. His expression didn't change, exactly, but something behind his eyes did. Garrett leaned over and whispered something. Stokes whispered back. Donovan was watching me with the wide, uncertain eyes of a man who was starting to understand that the room had shifted. "This gives everything to Miriam," Stokes said finally, setting the will down. "That's correct," Eleanor confirmed. "All assets, including full discretion over what, if anything, is gifted to Garrett and Donovan Caldwell." "This can be contested," Garrett said immediately. His voice was steady, but something in his jaw was tight. Dad's mental state in his final year. Eleanor placed a second document on the table. "Neurological evaluation. Completed 7 months ago. Dr. Patricia Hensley, Charlotte Neurological Associates. Mr. Caldwell demonstrated no cognitive impairment. No diminished capacity. Full mental competency confirmed in writing." The silence in that room was a different kind of silence than I'd experienced before. Not the silence of a room where nothing is happening. The silence of a room where everything is happening. Just very quietly. "I'd like to offer you both the properties," I said, looking directly at Garrett and then Donovan. "The house and the Asheville cabin. I have no desire to live in either of them. They should stay in the family." Something shifted in Garrett's expression. Not relief, exactly. More like the recalibration of a man who expected to lose something and suddenly finds himself winning again. "That's very gracious, Miriam." Eleanor slid a new document across the table. "Gift deeds for both properties. All you need to do is sign." Stokes reviewed the documents quickly. He was good, I'll give him that. It took him less than 2 minutes to find it. He stopped reading. He went very still. Then he turned the document so Garrett could see it and pointed to a specific line. I watched Garrett read it. I watched the muscles in his face do something complicated. I watched his hand tighten slightly on the edge of the document. Donovan leaned over. "Read it himself." Looked up at me. "There are mortgages," he said. Very quietly. "That's correct," Eleanor confirmed. "The primary residence carries a mortgage of $900. The Asheville property, $620. Both liens transfer with the deeds. As written. That's non-negotiable." Garrett looked at me. And for the first time in 24 years, I saw something in his face I had never seen before. He looked like his father's son. Not the successful version. Not the confident attorney version. The scared version. The version that had grown up knowing he'd never quite measure up. And had spent his whole life overcompensating. "You planned this," he said. I shook my head. "Your father planned this. I'm just honoring his wishes." "The properties are worth less than the debt," Stokes said, addressing his client. "If you accept this transfer, you inherit negative equity. You'd need to refinance both properties within 60 days, or face foreclosure on assets you don't own free and clear. And with their current credit situations," Eleanor added pleasantly, "refinancing may be complicated." Donovan made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Garrett stared at the document. Philip Stokes looked at me with what might have been professional respect. There was more. Eleanor wasn't finished. She placed a third set of documents on the table. Mr. Raymond Caldwell also retained a private investigator beginning 14 months before his death. The resulting report documents a pattern of financial activity that Raymond believed constituted elder financial abuse. The evidence has been reviewed by a Charlotte attorney who specializes in such matters. The material supports potential criminal charges. Stokes straightened in his chair. "I'd like to review those documents privately with my clients." "Of course," Eleanor said. Miriam has not decided whether to pursue action. That decision remains entirely hers. I looked at Garrett. Then at Donovan. I thought about all the years I had watched them treat their father like a resource. Like something to be managed and eventually harvested. I thought about the nights I'd sat with Ray in the dark, while he talked about his boys. Always hoping they'd become who he believed they could be. I thought about the look on his face the last time Donovan visited. The way Ray had watched his son watch the room instead of watching him. "I'm not pursuing charges," I said. Relief flashed across both their faces. Brief, visible, and immediately suppressed. "But I want you both to understand something. Your father knew. He knew everything. And he made this choice. Not out of cruelty. But because he loved you enough to give you a consequence instead of a crime." Garrett signed the gift deed first. Then Donovan. Stokes witnessed both signatures with the quiet efficiency of a man getting through something unpleasant. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I signed my own documents. Collected my copies. And stood up. "Thank you for your time," I said, to the room in general. And walked out. 6 months later, I bought a small house in Beaufort, South Carolina. Right on the water. A white clapboard house with a porch that wrapped all the way around. And a garden where I planted roses in every color Ray had ever said he loved. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Garrett had listed the Charlotte house 3 weeks after the transfer. It sold quickly, but after the mortgage payoff and closing costs, there was almost nothing left. The Asheville cabin went into foreclosure 4 months later. Donovan, I was told, had moved back to his mother's city in Ohio. Garrett was still practicing law. But the state bar had opened a preliminary review into the Aldridge referral partners matter, following an anonymous tip that Eleanor had suggested I consider making. I didn't feel triumphant about any of it. I felt something quieter than that. Something closer to peace and watched the water move. It was April again. The air smelled like salt and something blooming. And I thought about the man who had loved me so carefully. So deliberately. That he'd spent his final year making sure the people who underestimated me would one day understand exactly what they'd thrown away. He was right about one thing. Above all else. The things that matter most are hidden in plain sight. You just have to know where to look. And that was just the beginning. Because what happened 3 months later, when Donovan showed up at my door in Beaufort, I never saw coming. Subscribe, so you don't miss what comes next.